Hi everyone, and welcome to the math stage. In this video, we'll be looking at the laws of indices. But before we get straight into it, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and definitely leave a comment. Now, back to the laws of indices. When you're talking about indices, powers, index notation, it's normally written in this form, where you have a base and a power. Now the power normally tells you how many times the base multiplies itself. So with this base being A, it is telling us that A will multiply itself 3 times. And it's the same thing if you had a number instead of a letter. So if you had 2 to the 4th power, you know that 2 would be the base and 4 would be the power. And this would simply mean that 2 multiplies itself 4 times. Now, since you've understood this part, we're going to go into the individual laws of indices. There are 6 different laws of indices, and we're going to be going through each of the laws. So please watch this video to the end and make sure to subscribe. The first law of indices basically states that any non-zero number that is raised to the power of 0 is equal to 1. And that is easily understood. So no matter the value of the base, which would be the A in this instance, as long as it is raised to the power of 0, it is equal to 1. So even if we had 200 raised to the power of 0, it would be equal to 1. And if we had B raised to the power of 0, it would still be equal to 1. So that's the first law of indices. The second law of indices is telling us that if you have 2 terms written in index form and they have the same base and one is dividing the other, you keep the base and you subtract the indices. In this case, the first term is a to the m power being divided by a to the nth power. Now we keep the base, which is a, and we subtract m minus n to get the new power that a would be raised to. So for instance, if we had b to the 7th power being divided by b to the 5th power, we would keep the base, which is b. They have the same base, so we keep the base and we subtract the indices, so it would be 7 minus 5, which would be equal to b to the 2nd power. Let's look at a different one. If we had 4 raised to the 5th power being divided by 4 raised to the 3rd power would be equal with 4 raised to 5 minus 3, which would be equal to 4 being raised to the 2nd power. So when we are dividing indices and they have the same base, we keep the base and subtract the powers. Now we're at the third law. And the third law is the law of multiplication of indices. Now, when we have 2 terms written in index form and they have the same base, we keep the base and we add the powers. In this instance, a raised to the m power is being multiplied by a raised to the n power. What do? We keep the base, which is a, since they have the same base, and we add the indices. Now, this only works when they have the same base. Please remember that for these laws, they have to have the same base. If we had b raised to the 6th power being multiplied by b being raised to the second power, it would be equal to b being raised to 6 plus 2, which would end up being b raised to the 8th power. If we had 2 being raised to the 4th power being multiplied by 2 being raised to the 3rd power, it would be equal to 2 being raised to the 4th power plus the 3rd power, which would be equal to 2 being raised to the 7th power. Now let us move on and look at the 4th law. Now the 4th law. If you have a base, like in this instance, being raised to a negative power, you put 1 over it and remove the negative sign from before the power. Simply enough. If I had 2 being raised to negative 3, I would put a 1 over the 2 and raise it to a positive 3. Another one. If I had c being raised to negative 4, I will put a 1 over it and I would change that negative 4 into a positive 4. Pretty simple, right? The 5th law of indices is telling us that if you have a base raised to a power that's all in bracket and raised to another power, you keep the base and you multiply the indices. So here we have a raised to the power of m, all in bracket, raised to the power of n. We keep the base, which is a, and we multiply m times n to get the new power that a would be raised to. So if we had 2 raised to the power of 2, all in bracket raised to the power of 4, we would keep the base, which is 2, and we would multiply 2 times 4, and our new power would be 8. Similarly, if we had a base, which is c, raised to the power of 5, all in bracket, raised to the power of 3, it would be equal to c raised to 5 times 3, which would be equal to c raised to the power of 15. The 6th and final law of indices. If we had a base being raised to a fractional power, it simply means that the denominator would be the root and the numerator would be the power. So you're basically raising a, which is a base, to power over root. And this means that n would be finding the root of a and m would be the power of a. So we're finding the root of a to the m power, the nth root of a to the m power. You can also write it as the nth root of a, all in brackets, by m. Let's see. If we had 2 raised to the power of 2/3, it would be equal to finding the cube root of 2 raised to the power of 2, or we could find the cube root of 2 and then raise it to the power of 2. Pretty simple, easy enough to understand. So when we're working with indices, we just have to remember these 6 laws of indices, and the problems that we're solving will be easier. Let's recap all 6 laws. Law 1. A raised to the 0 power is equal to 1. Law 2. A raised to the m power divided by a raised to the n power is equal to a raised to m minus n. Law 3. A raised to the m power multiplied by a raised to the nth power is equal to a raised to m plus n. Law 4. A raised to the negative power is equal to 1 over a raised to the positive of that power. And law 5. A raised to a power, all in bracket, raised to another power is equal to a raised to the 2 powers multiplying each other. And the 6th and final law, a raised to a fractional power is equal to the denominator of that power, finding the root of a raised to the numerator, which would be the power. So it would be equal to the nth root of a raised to m, or you could write it as the nth root of a all raised to the power of m. Now these are the 6 laws of indices. Pretty simple to use and understand. And also like, share, comment, and definitely subscribe. Bye for now from the math stage.